And let's tie this now to what needs to happen to be able to help Adrian and other families that are experiencing mental illness in our communities. And one of those things that's really important is collecting meaningful data to understand if our policies are effective. Our next panel will discuss why data is important and what data collection is required by Texas law, and how some counties have made efforts to go beyond what is required to track their progress and how they began collecting the data in a meaningful way. So joining us today on the data panel will be Dr. Virginia Brown, the Honorable Tamara Needles, Director Jerry Freshour, Director Danny Smith, and Dr. Connie Almeida. So let me start with introducing Dr. Virginia Brown. She is an assistant professor at Dell Medical School in the Department of Population Health and a courtesy assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. She earned her master's degree in philosophy with a concentration in ethics and public policy, and her doctorate in sociology with concentrations in race, class, gender, and medical sociology. So let me turn it over to you, Dr. Brown.
Good morning, and thank you. And thank you to the Judicial Commission for Mental Health, to the attendees, and to the panelists. I'm here to talk to you today about data. So let's get clear. Please don't let your eyes glaze over. Don't let your mind tune out. We deal with data every day. We really do. So the question is, what is data? To the computer, it's a series of zeros and ones that form seemingly infinite combinations of information that the computer magically spits out into some kind of word or image or numbers for us to interpret. Data's been all around us at the conference these last 2 days. We heard from Dr. Keller yesterday that on average, it takes 8 to 10 years between the onset of mental health symptoms and intervention. And he reminded us that 50% of all lifetime cases of mental illness begin by the age 14. How do we know this? We know this by collecting data and analyzing it. Data lets us know where we've been so we can chart a path to where we need to go. So for example, you heard yesterday that Pfizer has reported in its clinical trial of COVID-19 that it's 90% effective. Data also reveals failures. For example, death by suicide is the third leading cause of mortality for youth ages 10 to 24. We have an opportunity in a failure like that to improve identification and interventions. When analyzed, data is a story, and that story helps us make a change, to make a difference, to learn from our failures, and it provides opportunities for improvement. Whether you're a researcher, a citizen scientist, or conducting data collection in your organization, purposeful and systematic data collection is an important and essential activity. So I want to set the stage for data is your friend. Next slide, please. And did it go? Yes, there we are. Okay. Hi, as you heard, I'm Virginia Brown, and I'm a member of the Judicial Commission on Mental Health Collaborative Council. I'm an educator and researcher, and my work centers on protecting the autonomy of persons who live with serious mental illness during a mental health crisis using psychiatric advance directives. I use data to help tell stories, to explore the wishes and preferences of people sharing their information, to influence policy, and to ultimately make changes in how research and discovery is conducted by employing a collaborative, community-engaged process. Next slide. So making sense of data is really important. And I have a quick video that we're going to show. And this video is, I'd like to call it, a 30-second public service announcement about why data matters. Could we launch that? Is it going?
These days, information is all around us, in every form imaginable and readily available if you know where to look for it and how to collect it. Once gathered and analyzed, this information and data can not only be insightful, but also beautiful.
Increasingly, policymakers, business leaders, and governments rely on insights born of data to help inform decision-making. The ability to effectively and accurately interpret data and communicate data-driven insights is a crucial prerequisite for positively influencing decision-makers and making effective decisions yourself.
Hello, my name is Estelle.
So I think it is a good public service opportunity for us to think about how data can inform us. We know, as it's stated, that it's all around us if you know where to look for it and how to analyze it. The goal of this panel today is to inspire you to action, to take the next steps, to commit, communicate, and collaborate to identify and divert in a timely manner persons living with mental illness and or intellectual developmental disabilities away from incarceration and into healthcare and community support. If we look at the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, Section 16.22, shorthanded as 1622, the early identification of defendants suspected of having mental illness or intellectual disability. You can see why they call it 1622. It is a mouthful in that title. We can identify the data, the pieces of information that need to be collected, and we can learn how to collect data in an objective and consistent manner across state jurisdictions so that we can be better informed to identify and divert persons into healthcare and community support. So I have a couple of questions for you as we get ready to hear from our panelists. These are some things to sort of get you thinking about what you might be doing in your organization. Do the folks in your organization really understand what 1622 is all about? And do we know why? Why does early identification matter? Thirdly, who collects data in your organization? And I might ask, how reliable are your data collection procedures? Where in your organization does the collected data go? How frequently do you use the data? What do you do with that knowledge? Who else do you share that data with? And how can we all get better at improving the lives of persons who are incarcerated and living with mental illness or IDD? These questions are designed to help you get started thinking about your organization, your role in identifying, collecting, and organizing, and reporting data, and how data can indicate the opportunities for change. Next slide. You've heard this before. What gets measured gets funded, changed, and improved. We know that 1 in 25 adults live with serious mental illness. We know that people with serious mental illness can experience significant functional impairment, requiring crisis resolution and long-term support. And too often, suitable care is not available for those who are incarcerated. In order to reduce the number of people with mental illness and or intellectual developmental disabilities, we need to collect, analyze, and report the findings so that we can reimagine, and you can see that on my sign back here, that we can reimagine and implement innovative programs targeted to provide healthcare and community support. One of those ideas is found in the Stepping Up Initiative. The Stepping Up Initiative is to reduce the frequency of people with mental illness in jails. In order to do this, counties must be able to reliably and accurately collect data on the number of people with serious mental illness or IDD in jails so we can measure our progress against that goal. We can do this. We can achieve the goal of reducing the number of people with these disorders by providing the kind of healthcare and community support that allows people to flourish. Next slide. You've heard a lot of acronyms, a lot of ideas. I want to introduce you to what I call the 3 C's. Commit, communicate, and collaborate. This presentation started with a statement that data is all around us if we know where to look and how to analyze it. We know where to find the variables, those individual units of analysis that we need to understand who we are serving, who are the persons in front of us. The goal of this panel is to inspire you to action, to take the next steps, to commit, to communicate, to collaborate, to divert persons away from incarceration and into care. I hope that you will commit to action and continue to take notes today, commit to communicating with presenters on this panel and the conference, keep talking with the folks in the chat, and most importantly, know that you are not alone in this process of identifying, analyzing, and implementing the results of your data findings. Collaboration is key to successfully serving the needs of persons who are incarcerated so that we can build a more just and humane system. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Brown. At the Hogg Foundation for Mental Health, we are committed to bringing awareness and change by using data, as you just pointed out, especially for the disproportionate representation of people of color in our current system. Given that, let us now hear from Judge Tamara Needles and Director Danny Smith from Travis County. Judge Tamara Needles has served as the presiding judge of the 427th District Court since January 2017. Judge Needles also manages the Travis County Supervision and Monitoring for Alcohol-Related Treatment, known as SMART, Reentry Court, which is a specialized docket operating bi-monthly and dedicated to the assessment, treatment, and supervision of the participants of the SMART program. Director Smith, Danny Smith is a licensed professional counselor in Texas and is certified correctional health professional. Currently, he is serving as Director of Inmate Mental Health Programs and Chaplain Services, and the Vice Chair of the Travis County Behavioral Health Criminal Justice Advisory Committee. With that, let me turn it over to you, Judge Needles.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Martinez, and thank you, Dr. Brown, as well, for your comments, and all of those who are on the panel with us today and the attendees. Albeit we can't see you, we are certainly with you in this fight and where we are moving forward with our efforts in changing the way our communities and our country looks at behavioral health issues. We are fortunate, Danny and I, to be on the board and executive directors for the Behavioral Health Criminal Justice Advisory Committee here in Travis County. I have been the judge again of the 427th District Court since 2017, had the honor of being elected to the chair position of that organization. And the next slide, if you will, it tells you a little bit about, and all these bubbles, about how fortunate we are in Travis County to have all of these entities as part of our organization. I think that was kind of step one when we're talking about gathering information. And like Dr. Brown is talking about, a commitment and communicate and the collaborative efforts of it, is that we were fortunate in Travis County to bring all of these entities together. And you can see from the slide, it's very diverse, from the mental health side of the house to the advocate side of the house to the criminal justice side of the house to the DA and the county attorney and the jail and APD. We're so fortunate to have all of those persons, all of those stakeholders in one organization. And so we have really taken off with then, once you have these entities in, how it is that you collect the data so that it becomes meaningful. To that end, last year in 2019, we contacted the Meadows and Tony Fabello on helping us to begin to know where to even collect this data. That was our commit, as Dr. Brown talks about. And so we said, okay, this is what we want to do. Tony, I hope you're listening somewhere, because I'm going to use your example that you continued to use of the car. Tony would, I'll say, warn against us in collecting of this data, in that sometimes you can collect data like you do with all the information that comes in your car. And when the dashboard light tells you, hey, you've got a low tire, it didn't tell you what the PSI is, what it's supposed to be full to, all of those other things. And Tony's point is that even though you may have this data, that doesn't necessarily mean that it gives you all the answers. So we took his warning and his car analogy, and we decided to move on forward anyway. And so once we made that commitment to collect that data, we were unfortunate in that we began the collection, quite honestly, in January and February of this year. And then with the pandemic, getting us all together in a virtual world and sharing that data was difficult. And I'll be honest, and Danny's going to speak to the actual how-tos of how that came about. But this year in the pandemic, with all that we've seen throughout the country, all that's happened in our country and even in our county on a smaller level, there are many more things that we would like to actually include in that data that's being collected. But having said that, the first step is to commit, communicate, and collaborate. We had to start somewhere, just like Dr. Brown was saying, is that you have to start somewhere. Maybe it doesn't have all the information that you want in it. Maybe it doesn't tell you as much as you need, as Tony Fabello talks about, is that it doesn't give you all the answers. But the bottom line is that you have to start somewhere. And so now we've at least gotten a springboard into where we continue to collect more and more data. And so we're very pleased to be able and hope that our lessons learned and our advice that we can give, and that Dadi's going to talk more about the collection, is helpful to other counties and agencies across the state. So to that end, we can go to the next slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Danny Smith, the Vice Chair of BHAC, to give you the how-tos. Thanks, Danny.
Thank you, Judge Needles. Just like you were saying, the collaboration that we had with the BHAC has been tremendous as far as getting started with the data collection. We've had a group meeting for years, and one of the things that really helped get us going was to establish some structure to what we were doing. And so we formed bylaws, and we decided that we need to have some officers in here, dedicated people that are committed to following through with this. And I think before you jump in and say, let's go collect data, you've got to have some formal structure to say, this is how we're going to collaborate. Otherwise, things tend to fall apart as people change positions, new people come on board. And I can't stress enough how helpful that has been with us here in Travis County. When we did start the BHAC, we sat down and said, what are our guiding principles and what's going to be the most important thing for us as we move forward? And we decided on several things. And one of the things was we were going to use the sequential intercept model as a guide to how we're going to make decisions and look at things and collect data. Another thing we said is we want to be sure that we are diverting individuals at the earliest point possible. And so when we're looking back on the data collection, we can refer to those values and that sequential intercept model to help guide us a little bit. We also then, once we've gotten the collaboration part going, we sat down and said, all right, what is important here? And we said, data is important. Just like Dr. Brown was saying, you're not going to get funded, you're not going to make change, you're not going to have an impact if you don't have some data to start with. And that's what we wanted. And the point of the data isn't, at least at first, isn't to go into much detail. It's just to start the discussion. What kind of data do we need to collect? What does it mean to us? What's important to us? And it really helps put things in perspective as you're trying to narrow things down. So we got the assistance from the Meadows Foundation, and we walked through a process with them using the SIM intercepts. So next slide, please. So what we did when the Meadows came and met with us is we started having that discussion. What data points do we want to have? And we had a lot of discussions around, do we want 24 points? Do we want 100 points? How are we going to use this data? And we came to some sort of consensus that we should have about 12 data points. And we should use the stepping up data because that's something we had already been collecting and it was feeding into a larger discussion. When we finally got to the point of finalizing it, we ended up with 22 data points. And that was because, as we're discussing things, we said, we can't leave this one out. It's too critical. But one of the things we really wanted to emphasize up front is we didn't want this to become unwieldy too quickly. And even with 22 points, that's a lot to get started with. So I'd really like to encourage you to just start with 8 or 10 at the most and just work through those as you're beginning. But we have a good established group, so 22 is not that much for us right now. One of the big things on collaboration is not one single agency is responsible for this. So we have to pull in a bunch of other people to work on it. And sometimes that can be difficult because, other people are going to have other priorities than data collection. They may not understand the importance of it. And there might be critical information that you need to have there. So there's a lot of conversations that have to happen up front. And support that has to be built for this. Once we did get to the point of defining our data points, we wrote them down so that we would all be on the same page and we'd have it. So historically, we can look back and say, what was the intention of this data point here? And we developed a Dropbox spreadsheet and every entity has been assigned. We put their name next to that data point and they are responsible for entering that information every month. Some of the challenges we've run into is that data, when we're entering it, because of confidentiality restrictions, someone may have something that says, I've got X amount of information here, but I need to compare it to mental health data. And for whatever reason, we can't share that. So they will provide the data to one entity who will then compile it and share back the raw numbers back to that, and they will post it at that point. Okay, next slide. So I didn't put up all of the data points, but just to kind of give an example here, we started with a number of persons screened up positive for mental health jail at admission. Using the sequential intercept model, we wanted to go through each of them. So this is intercept number 2. And you can see we've got the number of individuals that are coming into jail each month right there. And then for comparison, we have the number of Takumi forms that are completed during the month. And as Judge Needles mentioned, when we started this, COVID was a huge impact into our data collection. The first 2 months were just kind of a beta test to see how it goes and make sure we could get everyone to collect the data. And then COVID hit in March, and you can see a pretty significant drop. But that's what's good about the data is it told us something's happening, and we're not sure if that was due to COVID or at the same time we had initiated a new bonding process, and were these individuals getting out on regular bonds before they could even be assessed for the Takumi form. So next slide, please. So those were some of the challenges that we've had with the data so far, and it's already raising some questions. One of our county attorneys brought up, I haven't been receiving any of the forms recently. And so when we look back at the data, we could say, well, yeah, there's been a significant drop here. And just like the dashboard light analogy, it now tells us that we need to go back and dig a little bit deeper and find out what's going on. One of the other things we discussed a lot about was equity and gender issues. Should we collect that information? And once you start adding those layers to it, it makes it a lot more difficult. So I would suggest before you add those to it, as important as they are, and we definitely are going to add them in the future, just start with some simple numbers and then go back and start splitting them out based upon race and ethnicity and then gender. Because treatment programs and equity issues, we've got to be looking at those just as much as who's coming in and who's getting into treatment and all that. Of course, as we've said, start small with what you have, keep it simple, don't overdo it at first. And going back to that commitment, discuss it regularly. So with the BHAC, what we've done is we've established a data subcommittee, and we haven't had time yet to start looking at it. We wanted to run the data for at least 6 months and then bring in this data subcommittee that will review it on a quarterly basis. Additionally, we've also divided up and created some subcommittees within the BHAC on each of the intercepts within the sequential intercept model. And they've been charged with going back and looking at the data and saying, all right, which points of these fit your intercept and what are you seeing from that? And they're looking at gaps right now and developing recommendations. And then, of course, let it be something that evolves over time. It's not something that's static and just remains the same. You want to change it. So if you're looking at the data and saying, well, is this really helpful for us? Take it off the list and find something new that might be more meaningful to you. Next slide, please. And I think I mentioned all this. One further thing that we did discover too is when we were discussing the low numbers with one of the magistrates, one of the things he pointed out is that, we've got about 30 magistrates and not all of them will order the reports at the same rate that other people do. And we could look at the numbers and say, yeah, here's something that is tangible that is inconsistent. So one of the discussion items we're going to look at moving forward is, do we need to provide magistrates with some more guidance and training on this so that we can get that number up? And those are just some of the things that we've done. We're just in the beginning of this process. It's a learning thing for us as well, but it's been really, really valuable. And moving forward, we're really starting to see some neat things happen here in Travis County. And we appreciate all the help from the Meadows Foundation. Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay. Well, thank you, Judge Needles and Director Smith, for recapping the legal requirements and sharing your experience in creating data collection processes in Travis County. Our next speaker on this panel is Mr. Jerry Freshour. So Mr. Jerry Freshour graduated with a master's in public administration from Angelo State University in 1993. He currently serves as the Director of Crisis and Community Outreach Services for the Gulf Coast Center, the LMHA, and LIDA for Galveston and Brazoria counties, where he oversees the center's crisis response, forensic, and substance recovery outreach services. On to you, Director Freshour.
Thank you, Dr. Martinez. I'm going to be speaking on this topic from the perspective of a local mental health authority, the Gulf Coast Center, that is contracted by Galveston County to complete the 1622 written reports and connections to treatment for our connections to the Gulf Coast Center mental health treatment for our county jail releases. In March of 2017, Galveston County brought in the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute to conduct a full review of the county justice system, including the systems in place to satisfy mental health jail legislation. And that review found a fragmented system with deficiencies with the jail screenings and the assessments for mental health. There were issues with the transmission of the mental health information to the magistrates to consider for bail review hearings, and there were no 17032 hearings to review defendants that with mental illness that were in jail after 96 hours as required by law. County Judge Mark Henry created a criminal justice coordinating council of key county leaders and stakeholders to address that system assessment and the findings. The council is chaired by County Commissioner Stephen Holmes, and it includes the county judge, the county sheriff, Henry Trotchizit, the district attorney, Jack Rohde, some county court at law judges, district judges, and 2 representatives from the defense bar. Dr. Tony Fabello and his team from Meadows, they were brought on to provide technical assistance to the coordinating council. That coordinating council designated a 1622 work group. And what that group did is we toured and process mapped all the 1622 process. We made a flow chart of it from booking to release. That we really looked to make sure that all the steps of 1622 were done according to law, that they were efficient, and that the flow would facilitate a 17032 eligible defendant to a bond hearing. The work group created formal 1622 procedures. They prepared a bench manual for the magistrates, and then there was in-service training for defense attorneys and magistrates on both 1622 and 17032. The coordinating council takes a data-driven approach to monitoring the 1622 processes, and they meet monthly to monitor data on the outcomes of the 1622 system for defendants with mental illness and intellectual disability. We could look at slide 1. In Galveston County, although we're not part of the Stepping Up initiative, we do collect data and report monthly on the basic Stepping Up data points to this coordinating council. The council reviews monthly reports on the number of bookings and average time spent in booking, the number of jail releases overall, and the average time to release. We look at the jail population and the numbers that are released on personal bond. We have slide 2. The council reviews reports on how the county systems are performing for 1622. This includes the number of positive Texas Commission on Jail Standard screenings, the notifications to magistrates for bookings with mental illness or IDD, the 1622 reports that my staff do, the number of defendants reviewed for 17032 bond, and the number granted bond. And then we also have some data where we monitor the treatment compliance for the defendants on 17032 bond. The Meadows team worked with the Gulf Coast Center next to review the processes we had in place to connect Galveston County jail releases to mental health treatment at the Gulf Coast Center. At that time, the process was for jail releases that were not already established with the Gulf Coast Center. They were seen by the Gulf Coast Center jail liaisons for 1622, and they were also given instructions to walk in to the nearest walk-in intake site immediately at release. And at that time, the Gulf Coast Center had an intake process that was a 2-stage process where they were seen by an intake worker, and then they were brought back to see the psychiatrist. You can look at slide 4. So we did some research looking back at all the jail releases in 2018 to determine whether those with mental health disorders and intellectual disability had connected to treatment at release. We identified all the 2018 jail releases that had any previous history with the Gulf Coast Center before their jail episode, and we determined how many of those jail releases connected back to the center at release. And we also looked at their 1-year recidivism rate after release. So we looked at all 10,906 jail releases in 2018, and we found that 20%, or 2,200, had some previous history with the Gulf Coast Center. You can go to slide 5. Drilling down a little bit, we've only 638 of the 2209 jail releases that had history with the center had any contact with the center again after their 2018 release. Slide 6. So the further we drilled down with that data on those 2018 releases, we learned that 230 of the 638 releases that did have a contact with the center at release had really only had a one-time contact with the center, and they didn't fully complete enrollment. And 85 of the 638 that had contact with us were seen for crisis services only. And a fair number of those required inpatient hospitalization. I think what was really telling was the overall 1-year recidivism rate for the 638 jail releases that had contact with us after the release was 39%. So that report on connections to treatment and recidivism in 2018 led us to start a pilot project. In June 2020, Galveston County requested the Gulf Coast Center jail liaisons begin to complete the Gulf Coast Center intakes on defendants in jail as they were seen for the 1622 reports. So that would allow for the jail releases to be seen by psychiatrists by telehealth immediately after their release. So since June of 2020, our liaisons have been completing those intakes in the jail pre-release, and they monitor crystal reports through JMS daily to know when the defendant's released from jail in order to assist them with continuity of care medication arrangements and to schedule psychiatry appointments. We're going to look at some data around those connections to treatment on slide 7. These numbers we're looking at now, these are for defendants that were seen for 1622 that didn't end up on 17032 bond, so their services are at release or are voluntary. So now we're taking measure of that connections to treatment pilot to determine impact. In the first 2 months of the pilot, the jail liaisons completed 344 1622 reports. 115 of the 344 defendants seen for 1622 did accept Gulf Coast Center intake pre-release. We found that 229 either declined intake or they didn't feel like they needed it. 124 denied needing any treatment. 51 resided outside the county. 20 were already established with a provider, and 34 were our own clients. We only managed to complete new intakes on 47 of the 115 that said they would accept an intake. 2 reasons for that. 39 were released before we could see them for intake, and 29 were waiting for intake as of this report. So now we look at how many of the defendants we were able to complete intakes with, how many have followed up with treatment at release. Only 18 of the 47 that completed intake in the jail that gained their release as of this report, only 18 have been released. So we drill down and look at those 18. Finally, we see that 6 of the 18 defendants that completed intake and have gained release have engaged with the Center for Psychiatry at least. So the very early numbers on the first 2 months of the pilot for connections to treatment are that about 1/3 of the released defendants with completed intakes are engaging with the Center for Psychiatry. So these are early numbers. The council is discussing this pilot now from the standpoint of what we might do to have a bigger impact. We believe we could improve post-release adherence if we could find funding to start a FACT team to offer more intensive follow-up and supports for our jail releases. Funding remains a barrier to a FACT team, but we are looking at all possible opportunities, including state grants and foundations. The impact analysis and our review of the challenges with this post-booking diversion has us now turning our focus to finding ways to divert this population from ever entering the jail and the criminal justice system. We're fortunate that the Pew Foundation has recently agreed to fund a new assessment of the local systems for crisis and jail diversion to help the collaborative identify needed diversion resources for local law enforcement to divert from jail. So I would sum up that the last few years spent mapping the process for 1622 and gathering data on the local systems for the council and working with the council to address the findings. That this effort was very worthwhile because of the progress that we're seeing in Galveston County. We have all the stakeholders now working well together on 1622. We have an active 17032 mental health bond system. And we have improved connections to treatment for our jail releases with mental health and intellectual disabilities. The county is investing in law enforcement and magistrate portal technology to take our 1622 paper forms and transmission processes electronic. They're bringing online a new mental health specialty court, and likely we'll bring all of 1622 under that mental health court judge to have streamlined and consistent court processes. Galveston County has also received a new grant for a mental health public defender office. And we feel like the county will now be in good position for future funding opportunities, having the recent assessments of the justice system and the needs assessment for diversion. But I would say most importantly, we have the leadership of the coordinating council to affect change identified through our ongoing data analysis and those needs assessments. That's the end of my presentation, Dr. Martinez.
Very good. Thank you, Director Freshour, for your insights on getting these processes started. It was really quite informative. Our final speaker is Dr. Connie Almeida. She is a licensed psychologist in the state of Texas, as well as a licensed specialist in school psychology. She received her Ph.D. in psychology from the University of Maryland in 1985, followed by a postdoctoral specialization in developmental disabilities at the University of Massachusetts. Dr. Almeida currently serves as the Director of Behavioral Services for Fort Bend County. To you, Dr. Almeida.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I am going to change that bio because I realize it's been a long time since I've been doing this work. I'm delighted and honored to be part of the Judicial Summit and part of this panel and talking about collecting meaningful data. My first job out of graduate school was actually Director of Research and Training. So it feels good to be able to talk about this again. There might be a couple of typos in my slides, so I apologize beforehand if there are. So I am actually the Director of Behavioral Health Services for Fort Bend County's Department of Behavioral Health Services, which was created 10 years ago by the Council of Judges to really address the issue around people with mental illness in the criminal justice system. So for 8 years, we were under the Council of Judges. 2 years ago, we moved under Commissioner's Court. So we're very unique that we are actually part of county government, and we provide a lot of assistance to the courts, including the forensic court-ordered evaluation. So we have several docs within the department that do the competency evaluations and the sanity evaluations, in addition to a variety of other services. Interestingly, we are funded by the county, as well as by the 1115 waiver, which many of you are familiar with. And most recently, we received 2 Department of Justice grants, one that focuses on the Stepping Up initiative, which I'll talk about briefly later on. And then also a most recent one, which is actually from the Office of Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention, which I'm very excited about. That's a 3-year grant focusing actually on training of law enforcement and court personnel around youth mental health issues. Next slide. It's really exciting to hear everybody, and I've been taking a lot of notes, but I think one of the things that we've all talked about is the need to have a structure and to have that leadership, and the commitment to judicial leadership is essential for these processes. So, for example, just like in many other counties, we've had a criminal justice mental health initiative task force that we started, that really launched this work 10 years ago. And it was really the group coming together and talking about, what are the problems and what are the solutions. As part of this group, we've been able to develop some mental health courts. We have a very robust public defender's office. We also have a behavioral health services department. And but again, this is the structure that's allowed us to pull together to get the data and to try to solve the problems collaboratively. This was also the basis for our 1115 waiver project, which actually funded a crisis intervention team. So we used the 1115 waiver to fund our 10-member CIT team, which has been very, very successful at diverting people from the criminal justice system. And I'm pleased to say that team is now completely supported by the county, which is a great outcome. Next slide. So, and this is one of the typos, my apologies. So when we started talking about, what do we need to do in terms of 1622, obviously the jail was using the screening form for suicide, medical, mental health impairments that's required. We actually have a private provider in the jail. So the jail contracts with WellPath, that's the medical mental health provider in the jail. And this whole issue around Senate Bill 1326 and the reporting of this information to OCA was actually brought to us, to our attention by the district clerk's office. They had gotten a call from OCA saying we have no data. And so we're starting to think about, what do we need to do? What data do we need to collect? So the typo is actually that should be August 2nd, 2018. And the reason I include this slide is because it really actually highlights how quickly we came together in 2 weeks and were able to develop a process, including an order that was approved by by the Council of Judges to get this in place. So I just wanted to mention what was challenging is how do we do this? How do we share this information? Because the screening form is actually being done by the LVN. So it goes into the medical records. We have mental health professionals in the jails that are doing mental health assessments. So we're thinking, okay, so basically, when we looked at the code, it said, the mental health authority or another qualified mental health professional, which we leveraged our mental health professionals in the jail that are already seeing individuals when they're coming in. So then we needed to connect, obviously, the order from the magistrate judge to that assessment and file it in a timely manner, which can be challenging because things are stored in different places. So that's where behavioral health services actually played a critical role in this. And it was supposed to be a temporary role, but we've been doing it for 2.5 years. The goal is that it will be automated and we won't have to be having to do this filing because it does take a lot of time from staff. But But basically what happens is when the order is issued by the judge, we're notified. And so we can notify the jail to get the assessment if it's done. And so we compile all the information and then we file. Again, that sounds a lot easier than it is. But we've been able to develop the relationships with everybody. We're in an efficient process where we get cause numbers. I mean, obviously, we have to file those assessments in each of the cause numbers. And so we have to work very closely with our district clerk and our county clerk's office so that we are filing in the appropriate cause numbers. We've also created, because sometimes there is not a cause number and we're trying to meet that 96-hour deadline. So we've created a generic cause number so we can file, and then the district clerk or the county clerk can then go ahead and, further file and into the appropriate cause numbers later on. So we play a critical role in that. And again, we leverage the assessment that's already been done by the mental health professional in the jail. Most of the individuals that are booked into the jail that are screened and identified as having a mental health disorder then see a qualified mental health professional. Okay, next slide. So this is just a summary of, I think, what I've already talked about in terms of challenges and solutions. So we still have several challenges. For example, filing out of county cases, that's very challenging to do. And, so often we can't. And that's something that we need to figure out how we address that. So some of these things are, trying to identify what we're, and now how we're using that information. Like we're filing and we actually copy the public defender's office or the defense attorney on record, the mental health division of the DA's office, and the mental health division of our community supervision corrections department. However, the challenge is how the judges and the team is using that information to make those decisions in a timely manner. Okay, next slide. So I just wanted to present a little bit of the information that we have. So as I mentioned, we started this process in August of 2018. So the information that I'm actually sharing with you is from January 2019 through September 2020, so about 21 months. So our total bookings in the jail for that period of time, 21,000. So, we have about an average of 1,000 individuals being booked per month. The highest number was actually January of 2019. The lowest number was April of 2020, obviously. Our jail population and our total bookings have actually decreased over time, not so much for the mental health population. So if you look at that, the total number of orders that were issued were 3,000. The number of cases that were not eligible for filing, either they were from a lower court, parole violations, or out of county, were 417. The total number of assessments that we actually filed within those 96 hours were 2,451. So that's like a 95% filing on time. And we've really improved over time. And I'll show you a little bit of what it looks like over time. So what does this tell us? So basically 13.2% of the individuals that are booked into the jail have a mental health or IDD diagnosis. I mean, obviously, we are tracking IDD, small number, but we are tracking. And then it also tells us, these are the main diagnoses that we're seeing. So we just take the information that is recorded in that, the 1622 form, the Takumi form, and then we track it in an Excel database. Next slide. So again, I know this is hard to see. It's very hard for me to see. My eyes are just getting worse as I get older. But this is just what it looks like from January 2019 through September of this year. Again, you can tell our jail population has actually decreased over time. Obviously, in April, there were very few bookings, 426, yet 86% of those had mental illness. So, and then this gives you a little bit, we actually break it down further into primary and secondary diagnosis. But there was a lot of information, so I'm just trying to provide you with the information that I think is most relevant. So again, this is what we're seeing. 44% of the individuals coming in, depressive disorder, 31% of bipolar disorder, 15% schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, 4% PTSD, and 2% anxiety. And I think this would be consistent with what we're seeing throughout the system. Next slide. This is actually just a copy of the order that we created, and it just is. We have this amazing commitment from our judges and everybody working together, and the fact that we were able to get an order approved by all the judges within 2 weeks and the process in place was pretty remarkable. So, and the judges also allowed the dissemination of the information to go to the mental health division of the probation department. So that's also included in the order. Next slide. Oh, I think everybody knows this form, so I'm not going to talk about it. Next slide. So just wanted to mention a little bit about, so we are actually one of the 13 sites. I think there's 13 Stepping Up Initiative sites in the state of Texas, and we're actually one of the sites that is actually funded. We were awarded in October. Obviously, the grant and the budget was only released in March, so we've been doing this work since March. Next slide. I'm going very fast because I have like 3 minutes. Most folks, we've already talked about what the goals are of the Stepping Up initiative to obviously reduce the number of people with mental illness and co-occurring mental illness. Let's not forget that we've been talking a lot about mental illness, but we need to recognize that a large percentage of the individuals with mental illness in our criminal justice system also have co-occurring mental illness. Mental illness also have co-occurring mental illness and substance abuse. That is a population that we really need to address. I was really impressed that in Galveston County, how you're really looking at connections to treatment and actually looking at recidivism rates. That's a big challenge that we have. Next slide. I think I'm going to skip a couple of slides. You can skip that one. Yeah. And so I just want to talk a little bit about kind of the summary of where we are. We have this commitment from leadership and from the community stakeholders. We have the University of Houston, Dr. Robin Gearing and his colleagues, Dr. Kovac and Dr. Bartholomew, are actually part of our evaluation team and assisting us with this project. Again, we have this commitment. We have CIT, we have specialty courts. But we have a lot of missing pieces, and the data sharing across systems, and really even an agreement on definitions and data and outcomes and what to ask. And what's been really rewarding lately is that our partners are recognizing the importance of data and why we need to ask data across systems. So, for example, our IT department has been amazing in terms of trying to extract the medical mental health information from the private provider's electronic health record in our jail. And then how do we integrate that information with our jail information and then with connection to services? Next slide. Next slide.
Every year, millions of people with mental illnesses are booked into jails across the United States, many of whom also have substance use disorders. Since 2015, Stepping Up has rallied hundreds of counties to commit to reducing the number of people with mental illnesses in jails. Now, from policymakers to law enforcement, leaders in communities of all sizes agree jails should not be de facto psychiatric facilities. But despite grasping the gravity of this national crisis, many counties lack the data to understand how big the problem is in their own communities. That's why Stepping Up is helping counties strengthen their capacity to collect data to answer 4 critical questions. How many people with mental illnesses are entering jail? How long are they staying? Are they connected to treatment once they're released? And how often do they come back to jail? Counties can use this data to develop comprehensive plans that safely keep people with mental illnesses out of jail and connected to the help they need. Step up today and collect data to drive change.
Thank you.